Our top priority at MoDOT, we're going to talk about today safety. We have Nicole Hood and John Nelson with us today. I'll turn it over.
Okay, well, thank you, Eric, and good afternoon. I'm Nicole Hood, the State Highway Safety and Traffic Engineer for MoDOT, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Our planning partners have been so instrumental in just moving several safety initiatives forward, and we really do appreciate that. And what better group to be in front of to recap some of the trends that we saw last year with regards to highway safety and just talk about moving forward, doubling down those efforts and focusing on strategies to move forward towards zero deaths. So yeah, we faced so many challenges we never would have thought of with the pandemic, just really troubling statistics on the roadway front. We had increasing crash rates and fatalities. But you know what? With all of us working together in a collaborative effort, I'm going to remain optimistic that we can overcome this and we can change our results because of partnerships with folks like you. And I'm especially excited about our new strategic highway safety plan, Show Me Zero, that John will be sharing with you shortly. So as I reflect to a year ago, next slide, please. Okay, so as I reflect to a year ago, last February, when I presented at the statewide planning partner meeting, I shared how our traffic fatalities were trending down. So we were making some progress, obviously still a long way to go, but we were at least moving in the right direction. We had a 5% decline in 2019, but like I said, then came 2020, and I never would have predicted what was to come. So just a side note real quick, the 2020 numbers, the fatality numbers, they're still preliminary and they won't be official until later in the year. But the fatality numbers have been stabilized now for a couple weeks. So what we're seeing is we're up over 100 more fatalities in 2020. So we're at 986 and we ended at 881 in 2019. So we've had a 12% increase. That's the biggest jump between 2 years that we've seen since 2015 when we jumped 103 fatalities. And this is the most fatalities in a year that we've seen since 2007 when we were at 992. Next slide. So if you look at the fatalities broken down by months, we were feeling pretty good going into 2020, had a great January. Actually, it was one of our lowest Januaries with regards to fatalities on record. February was not so great, and then the pandemic hit. So if you look at the chart here, May, June, and July, they were terrible, well above 2019 numbers, as well as the 5-year average. June alone had a 38% increase in fatalities. Next slide. So the pandemic, it underscored that fewer cars on the road, it doesn't mean that things are safer. And like I said, it was alarming. The pandemic, it took a large percentage of cars off the roadway for much of the year, and we saw more people die. So definitely not what we thought would happen. But I'll tell you what it reminded us of is you can be the only person on the road and you can still die because of the decisions that you make behind the wheel. So even if nobody else is out there with you, and that was my big takeaway. And that's why personal responsibility and good driving behaviors are so important. So as our roadways became less crowded, risky driving behaviors became more prevalent. People were taking more chances, and it's been reported several times all across the nation that the open roads, it unleashed speeders and reckless driving. Next slide. So speed was a contributing factor in almost 40% of the fatalities in 2020, and that's a notable increase in a category that was already one of the biggest contributors to fatal crashes. So preliminary numbers indicate there's 385 speed-related fatalities in 2020. That's 75 more than 2019. And we're still hearing reports about speeding concerns across the state. Just 2 weeks ago, the patrol set up a speed enforcement zone in St. Louis is on 367, and the troopers they reported that they stopped drivers going 120 to 140 miles per hour. Really what's even more troubling is the patrol reported 8 vehicles refused to pull over after seeing police lights and hearing sirens. So the drivers, they just raced away from the troopers, and it became unsafe to the point where, they just couldn't continue that pursuit. So once again, people driving reckless with no fear. Next slide. So not only did we see a jump in the speed-related fatalities, we also saw a jump in unbuckled fatalities. So in 2019, we had 348 people killed in crashes without a seatbelt. In 2020, we'll end up close to 430 once the numbers are finalized later in the year. So that's almost a 25% increase in unbuckled fatalities. So as one might expect, the results from our statewide seatbelt survey for 2020, they went down a bit. Missouri's seatbelt usage went from 87.7 to 86.1%. And, it does make sense because we saw a corresponding increase in our number of unbelted fatalities. Next slide. Cell phone use. It continues to be one of the most concerning behaviors we all observe on the roadways every day. And sadly, over half of the distracted driving fatalities in Missouri, they claim the life of another person and not that distracted driver. So we ended 2020 with 76 people killed in crashes involving distracted driving. And this number is undoubtedly higher than that since so many of these crashes go unreported. Our current law, it does only prohibit texting and driving for operators 21 years of age and younger, and only 2 states left that don't prohibit texting while driving for all drivers, and that's Missouri and Montana. Next slide. So one area that we didn't see an overall increase in 2020 was impaired driving fatalities. Although there were a couple months, May and June, they were up quite a bit, but they were down in other months, so no overall increase there. In 2020, Missouri had 185 substance impaired fatalities. So impaired driving makes up about 20% of the fatalities in Missouri, or at least it has in the last few years. Our state, we continue to face new challenges related to substance impairment with prescription medications, the medical marijuana, opioids. So it's important to remind folks that driving high is just as risky as driving drunk. Next slide. Work zones is another area we're trending in the wrong direction. We ended 2020 with a 50% increase in work zone fatalities. So we increased from 18 in 2019 to 27. And we had 48 TMA crashes in 2020 compared to 33 the previous year. So that's the most TMA hits that we've ever seen in a given year. And I guess for those of you who don't know what I'm referring to when I talk about TMA hits, that's when vehicles crash into our truck-mounted attenuators or these giant crash cushions that are installed on the back of our dump trucks to protect our employees in work zones. So just unfortunate, because with that being said, it's very apparent that our highway workers and our contractors, they're even more at risk now with this spike in the speeding and the distracted driving and just the trends that we're seeing in general. Next. Motorcycle fatalities, they're going to be almost identical to where they were in 2019. So we had 121 in 2019. Preliminary numbers were right at 120 for 2020. So, it appears we're not going to see any substantial increase in the overall fatalities from the change in the helmet law this year. But keep in mind, the law went into effect August 28th. So this only included a couple months of the motorcycle riding, during the heavier months. So it's a little too early to make determinations in what we've seen in the data. 2021 will give us a better insight on the impact of the change to the law. So let's just hope, that folks continue to make that safe choice when they're riding and they continue to use those helmets. Next slide. Really unfortunate trend and a historic level of fatalities for our vulnerable roadway users. So our pedestrian and bicycle fatalities have increased by 100% over the last decade. So in 2020, we had 126 pedestrians that were killed. That's a 15% increase from 2019. traveling on foot or on bicycle now, it's more dangerous than it was before. Our roadway users, they're dealing with different levels of congestion and just different traffic patterns than what they were accustomed to before the pandemic. So, and I also want to mention just an important reminder this time of year, if you're in a stalled vehicle alongside the high-speed routes, please stay in that vehicle with your seatbelt on until help arrives. We've seen an increase in fatalities with pedestrians getting struck and killed when they get outside their stalled vehicle and hit by high-speed traffic. Actually, this morning on our snow call, there was a patrolman who actually did get hit by a car that was out of control. Luckily, there was no fatality involved. But yes, just a reminder, stay in those vehicles if you end up getting stalled, and just leave that seatbelt on in the car. Next slide. Okay, on a positive note, I'm excited to say that we have other states. They're joining and adopting Missouri's Buckle Up, Phone Down safety program as their own. So across the country, we have 18 states now that are using the BUPD message in one way or another. And I actually got an email yesterday from Washington DOT, and they had the Buckle Up, Phone Down logo in their signature line on the email. So that was pretty cool because I didn't even realize that Washington DOT was using the logo. But I wanted to mention, if you recall, last year, I asked for the statewide planners to help promote BUPD nationally. So today I wanted to give a shout out to the Boonslick Regional Planning Commission. Due to their leadership, Buckle Up, Phone Down was the recipient of the NATO, the Excellence in Regional Transportation Award. And it was recognized nationally for its success in saving lives on Missouri highways. So that's just really a true testimony. And it's a great example of our planning partnerships. I thought that was pretty cool. So thanks to Chad and Krishna for nominating BUPD for that award. And really just thanks to all the planning partners who continue to promote the challenge. This program is more important now for sure than ever as our traffic fatalities in Missouri rise. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime if you have ideas on how to keep the momentum going. And for those of you who haven't done so already, you can accept the Buckle Up, Phone Down challenge at www.buckleupphonedown.com. Okay, next slide. And speaking of Buckle Up, Phone Down, two of the Commission's safety legislative priorities this session, it includes the primary seatbelt law and hands-free legislation. So it would be great to have your support for these initiatives. Two simple things that could wipe out at least half of our most common fatalities. So we could truly see a difference in lives saved in Missouri if these laws could be implemented and enforced. So how can you help? Well, you can help by contacting your elected official to express your support for these bills, and you could be there to testify if the hearing comes to fruition. I think they are allowing some of that virtually, or like I said, you can submit that written testimony. The two bills that have been filed that we're following closely with regards to hands-free legislation are Representative Wallingford's, and that's House Bill 853, and then Representative Tate's, and that's House Bill 1076. So to my knowledge, there has not been a primary seatbelt bill filed yet. And I also just want to mention, if you use Facebook, you can follow the Hands-Free Missouri Coalition. So you can go out to Facebook and search for Hands-Free Missouri, and you can get the latest legislative updates. And then you can join the efforts of the Hands-Free Coalition to help save lives in Missouri. Next slide. So I wanted to end my part of the presentation, and I'm going to pass it off to John, but I wanted to share a quote from the Governor's Highway Safety Association that really resonated with me when I read it. And I think it fits in line with where we're headed with our new safety plan that John's going to be sharing here real quick. So I'll go ahead and read this quote. So the vaccine for unsafe driving is available to every American right now. Slow down, buckle up, stow your phone, and never drive impaired. If we don't inoculate ourselves against these dangerous driving habits, a lasting impact of this pandemic will be even more traffic deaths, an unacceptable outcome. Okay, so with that, John, let's talk about Show Me Zero. I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Nicole. And let me just say thanks to Eric and his team for the invite to be here today. I got to be here a year ago and kind of tease where we were going with the new strategic highway safety plan in Missouri, and many of your organizations were part of that. And it's just my pleasure to get to kind of introduce that to you today and show you where it ended up and where you can find that. Starting in, I think, October of 2019, we brought together a really great cross-functional group. They came together. We had about 65 individuals from 30 plus different organizations that really got together to determine where were we going to go with the next edition of the state's strategic highway safety plan. This was going to be our 5th edition. The very first blueprint was published back in 2004, and we had since had a second, third, and fourth edition of that. And so it would have been fairly easy for us as a group just to say, hey, let's continue forward with the kind of the same approach. But the group really talked about what things the existing plans did well, maybe some things that we wanted to tweak or shift, just given where our culture was. And keep in mind, this was all well before we knew anything about COVID-19 or a pandemic. But I've got to say, I think where the group landed on really set the stage well to hopefully address the things that we just heard Nicole highlight in 2020. Next slide, please. So when the group got together, there really were just a few simple goals that we wanted to accomplish. Some of them were very practical. We wanted to shorten the plan, for example. The previous plans had grown to 150, 160 pages, something like that. I don't know how well you guys can see this right now, but the new plan is a smaller document. It's only about 44 pages long. So really trying to capture those short attention spans that we have. In kind of that same line of thinking, we wanted to narrow the focus of the new plan. So again, the previous plan had 27 different sub areas, and really this plan narrows that down to four focus areas and then 3 special user groups that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But probably the biggest shift that we wanted to make with the new plan, Show Me Zero, was we wanted it to be for everyone, for every Missourian to have an opportunity to look at that and say, hey, there's something I can do either as an individual, as a family, or at my place of employment, where I volunteer, whatever it might be. And so to do this, I'll just be honest, we kind of stole a page out of the Citizens Guide playbook, and we said, hey, that document served its purpose really well to educate Missourians on how transportation funding in the state works, and then on the backside of that, showing them how they personally contribute to that. And that's really exactly what we set out to do with the new plan and Show Me Zero, was to do just that thing, so that we wanted every Missourian not to have to wonder or just kind of hear about crash problems. We really wanted them to have a fundamental grasp on the issue at hand in Missouri, the extent of it, the reach of it, and really the causes behind that. And then we wanted to come in on the backside of that and say, hey, here are some specific ways that you as an individual, you as an organization can help us change the landscape of highway safety in Missouri. And then the last goal that really the team had was to enhance that online presence. Next slide, please. So again, when we talked about narrowing this focus and really reaching an audience of all Missourians, ultimately we settled on 4 key messages. And I hope these are familiar to you, because if you look at what Nicole just highlighted in our state, and then you read the quote from Governor's Highway Safety Association about what's being seen nationally, it's these 4 things. It's occupant protection, which is your seatbelts, your car seats, your helmets. It's distracted driving, it's speed and aggressive driving, and it's impairment. That's not to say there aren't other issues that come out and play. Yes, a deer may run in front of someone. There's other things that can happen, weather certainly. But the vast majority of the time, it comes down to either driving distracted, driving too fast or too aggressively, or driving impaired. And then oftentimes that's coupled with the fact that someone was not utilizing the proper occupant protection. So really our goal with this, again, in keeping that mindset of keep this simple and straight to the point so that everyday Missourians can understand it, we wanted to give them these 4 messages: buckle up, phone down, slow down, and drive sober. And so that's really where we landed on the core of this message. Next slide, please. So real briefly, I'll just this may be a little bit redundant based on what we saw, but the 4 emphasis areas really mirror Again, what Nicole highlighted in 2020, the first is occupant protection, again, which is your seat belts, your car seats, and your helmets. And this is by far the single quickest, cheapest, easiest thing we can do to save lives in Missouri. She talked about our seatbelt survey was down to 86% this year. Even in 2019, it was 88%, but it's that small piece of the pie that's not buckling up. They're accounting for about 2/3 of the vehicle occupant fatalities in our state. Actually, in 2020, it was closer to 70%. And the reality is when you look at survival rates in these crashes, the people that are buckling up, the people that aren't buckling up, if every passenger and driver in Missouri car crashes was wearing a seatbelt, we would immediately see somewhere around 240 lives saved every year just from that simple decision. So that's why things like primary seatbelt law is important to us. Obviously, that's not a silver bullet. It's not going to fix it, but it's a key tool to help us get there. Next slide. Emphasis area number 2 was distracted driving. Again, Nicole alluded to this, but it's one of the fastest growing contributors that we've seen in our state over the past 5 or 6 years. Too often, this kind of gets lumped into that individual freedom or liberty argument that we so often associate with seatbelts and helmets. Let me just be clear, distracted driving is not like that. In Missouri, in fact, someone other than the distracted driver in those fatal crashes has been killed. So it's not the person being distracted. More often than not, it's someone else. The other myth with that is that this is something just the teens are doing, but you look around you when you drive to the grocery store, you drive to work, drop your kids off at school, there's lots of people who aren't in their teens doing this. And in fact, our data indicates that 70% of the people in cell phone related crashes are drivers that are age 22 or older. Next slide, please. This is probably the one that has been most concerning for me and has really been highlighted the most in the pandemic year is speed and aggressive driving. Again, this is year after year after year, this has been the single top contributing circumstance in Missouri fatal crashes. And unfortunately, it really just went the wrong direction in 2020 after some promise in 2019. You can see that when we consider all aggressive driving fatalities, so that's speeding, driving too fast for conditions, following too close, or improper passing, 541 of the 986 fatalities were aggressive driving related. When you just look at those two speed categories, speeding or driving too fast for conditions, again, 385. So that's 40% just related to speed. And we talk about impairment a lot. In fact, I'm getting ready to talk about it on the next slide. But the reality is speed is cited as a factor in fatal crashes in Missouri nearly twice as often as impairment. Next slide, please. So speaking of impairment, that is the fourth emphasis area. It still continues to account for about 20% of the fatalities in our state. That is substantially down from a decade ago when we were closer to 30% or even about a third of our fatalities. That is lower than the national average. So those are some good things that are happening in terms of impaired driving in Missouri. But that's not to say it's without its challenges. We have seen over the last 10 years, drug impaired drivings have increased substantially, almost 50%, whereas alcohol related impairment has come down. Now you can see over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's kind of leveled off. So we're not seeing that dramatic swing like we were seeing from earlier in the decade, but certainly substance impairment, including prescription medication, painkillers, medical marijuana, opioids, whatever it may be, all of those things come into play. So those are the 4 areas. Next slide, please, with those key messages. Again, buckle up, phone down, slow down, and drive sober. But the group also recognized that within those 4 behaviors or 4 tendencies, there are 3 groups that kind of stand out as being overrepresented in the data. And these probably are no surprises to you as well, but that's our teen drivers, our older drivers, and then our non-motorized users, or our pedestrians and our bicyclists. So the plan, Show Me Zero, has a section dedicated to them. Again, there is a lot of overlap, though, between those behaviors we see, speed, impairment, and distraction, and the impacts that we see, for example, on pedestrians and bicyclists or with teen drivers. Next slide, please. So to kind of bring this home, I guess, when we shared this last year and we kind of teased that we wanted the new plan, Show Me Zero, to be something for all Missourians. We didn't want it just to be for MoDOT or the Missouri State Highway Patrol or just our planning partners that are on this call today. We literally wanted every single Missourian to be able to take something away from this. So we really strive to make it, I like to call it rated E for everyone. One of the ways that we tried to do that is the way we grouped the strategies in the document. In the second part of it is to group them by user type. So for instance, we have strategies just for schools, strategies just for businesses, law enforcement departments, public health agencies, and yes, roadway improvements, public works. There was some concern early on that, hey, we're just talking about behavior. What about the roadway improvements? Trust me, there are more roadway improvements than any other category of strategies in this document. So you'll get 2 full pages of public works strategies to be adopted. But that's really the goal of this plan, is to put something that everybody can pick up and say, hey, here's 2 or 3 things, or maybe 10 or 12 things, whatever it is, that I can do, or that we as an organization can do to help Missouri. And Nicole said it, and she hit it right on the head, that if we learned anything in 2020, it's that we can take half the cars off the road and still see many people dying in car crashes because of the decisions we're making. So we do all have a role to play in that. I want to talk briefly about the communication plan for Show Me Zero, and we'll kind of finish up with this. First off, if you have not read the plan or seen the plan, please go to savemolives.com today. Download it. It's only 44 pages long. There's a couple of options. You can either download the electronic PDF right there, or you can kind of navigate through the website itself. We would also be happy to send you a box of hard copies for your organization if you want to share those with your team. But go there, take a look. We are continuing to work on SaveMoLives.com to bring some performance enhancements, like a dashboard with some of the data. But next week, we're going to be putting out a statewide news release that sort of hits on this presentation. It's going to recap what we saw in 2020, and it's also going to introduce the Show Me Zero plan to Missourians. So we're hoping to get some good coverage out of that. We're also going to be developing a standard canned presentation that hits the highlights, much like what we've done here today on the new plan, and that's intended for your use. Certainly, there's ways we can talk about doing that. We would be glad to come present to your organization or to your member organizations, but we also want to set this up where you and your partners can go out and help us have more ambassadors for this cause and get that message out. So we're working on a presentation that we can just kind of hand off and do and say, hey, here you go in 15, 20 minutes or whatever it is. You can tell somebody what it means to Show Me Zero. We're also putting together some new, actually creative material, videos, PSA, social media graphics that we can use both organically and as part of a paid media plan. So we expect to get that material next month, and then we'll really start rolling out some of that public awareness like we've done with some of our other campaigns in the spring and throughout the summer. One of the ways you can help, short of course, reading the plan and seeing how you can get involved directly, but we are going to be looking for continual opportunities to talk about Show Me Zero throughout the year. Whether that's for cities, counties, chambers of commerce, conferences, virtual events, you name it. And again, that could be us giving that presentation or us supplying you with the information and the material you need to do this. So we would love your help in identifying those opportunities, or maybe there's other things that come to your mind in ways that we can help. So that's all I have. Again, go to SaveMoLives.com, download your version of Show Me Zero today. Let us know if there's questions that you have, or you think there's ways that we can improve the website, if there's material we can get to you. We really are asking for your help to get this out. Again, we want this to go to all Missourians. Now, we're not going to stand on the street and hand out hard copies of the plan to everyone. That's not really feasible, but whatever we can to do to promote this and get the word out, it's really going to take all of us to make much of a difference. So thank you for your time, and I'm sure Nicole and I would be happy to entertain any questions that the group may have.
Cole and John, thank you very much. Scary statistics there and trends. Appreciate you going over and sharing that information with everybody. I would have never guessed that either at the beginning of the pandemic, that's what we'd see. Anybody have any questions or comments for John or Nicole? You can put them in the chat box, or you should be able to unmute your phone now and ask them. We have a question. I think you can see it, John. Do we have a presentation version geared towards high school students?
Well, I really like that idea. We have a lot of programs in our kind of existing programs that target teens, whether that's Traction or Think First or First Impact. As we're putting together this canned presentation, certainly I think we can look at maybe having a couple different spins on it, maybe some that are more geared towards youth statistics or things like that. The other thing I would say is, it's this presentation that we'd be happy to share. It isn't necessarily completely locked down. So there's some ways we can tweak that, but I like that suggestion, and we'll definitely keep that in mind as we're developing the presentation here in the next month or so.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? All right. John and Cole, appreciate you very much for coming over today and talking about safety. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome. Well, it's come that time. I think we're at the end of our agenda, unless I'm missing something, but I wanted to thank you all for your attention today. Also, we appreciate, such great partnership. I've worked with a lot of DOTs in a lot of different ways, and I think our partner relationship we have with MoDOT and the RPCs and the MPOs around the state is unmatched in the U.S. The bottom-up decision-making really does yield itself to some great results in the transportation system. So I wanted to just personally thank each and every one of you for your attention today, for your engagement throughout the year with all parts of MoDOT so that we can improve the transportation system. As part of this meeting, we're going to send you an email. It'll have a survey in it. It'll also have a link to everything you saw today that you can use, and the PowerPoints and the like will be included in there. So without further ado, or in any comments from our senior leadership, I think I want to thank you and for your participation.